GitHub says 200 OK, but Jenkins logs show nothing. The culprit? A missing trailing slash in the webhook URL. Let's break down Jenkins GitHub integration and webhooks, how it works, and the exact mistake behind that failure. A GitHub webhook is an HTTP post request sent to a specified URL on your Jenkins server when events like pushes or pull requests occur. Jenkins listens via the GitHub integration plugin and triggers corresponding pipelines. Think of it as a delivery app sending an order to a chef. If the intercom is unplugged, the order is lost. Before configuring webhooks, ensure your Jenkins environment meets requirements. Use Jenkins 24403 LTS with the GitHub integration plugin. Your Jenkins must be publicly accessible over HTTPS with a valid SSL certificate, and your firewall must allow inbound traffic from GitHub's IP ranges. In your GitHub repository, go to Settings, Webhooks, Add Webhook. The payload URL must be exactly https://jenkins, example, com/GitHub webhook/ with a trailing slash. Choose application/JSON content type and set a secret for HMAC verification. Select individual events like pushes and pull requests to reduce noise. After installing the plugin, configure it under Manage Jenkins Configure System. Add a GitHub server with a personal access token. In your job configuration, under Build Triggers, enable GitHub Hook Trigger for Git SCM polling. Avoid letting Jenkins auto-manage webhooks in production. HMAC verification ensures the webhook is genuinely from GitHub. When you set a secret, GitHub computes an HMAC SHA 256 signature and includes it in the XHub signature 256 header. Jenkins computes the signature on the received payload and compares them. If they don't match, Jenkins rejects the webhook with a 401 status. Most production Jenkins instances sit behind a reverse proxy like Nginx. The proxy must correctly forward webhook post requests. Ensure proxy pass includes the trailing slash, set the host header to the original hostname, and disable request buffering to avoid modifying the payload. When webhooks fail, start with GitHub's recent deliveries to see the HTTP response. Then, check Jenkins logs for received post messages. Verify network connectivity from Jenkins to GitHub API. Use curl to manually send a test post to the webhook endpoint. Jenkins pipeline offers fine-grained control with GitHub push and GitHub pull request triggers. Use branch to filter by branch. For complex scenarios, the generic webhook trigger plugin allows custom JSON path filtering, but be aware it bypasses HMAC verification. Large repositories can generate hundreds of webhooks per minute. Use branch filtering at GitHub level to limit events. Implement a deduplication proxy that aggregates pushes within a window. Increase Jenkins executors and set a quiet period to batch rapid commits. Webhook failures are often silent. Implement synthetic monitoring, a cron job that pushes to a test repository and verifies a build triggers within 5 minutes. Monitor Jenkins logs for errors and use GitHub's API to check webhook status. Set up a Grafana dashboard for delivery rate and latency. Migrate from the classic GitHub plugin to the GitHub integration plugin for better event handling. Install the new plugin, update job triggers to the new GitHub hook trigger, and ensure repository URLs use the HTTPS format. Test with a sample push after migration. Secure your webhook pipeline with HTTPS, IP whitelisting for GitHub's ranges, and regular rotation of secrets and paths. Audit which repositories have webhooks pointing to your Jenkins. Consider using GitHub apps for more granular permissions. This is the same issue we highlighted at the start. Here's exactly why that happened. In a production incident, pull request webhook stopped triggering builds. GitHub showed 200 OK, Jenkins logs confirmed receiving the post, but no build started. The root cause was a branch filter set to main only, which filtered out PRs from feature branches. The webhook URL was missing the trailing slash, causing Jenkins to not respond to the webhook. The fix adds the required trailing slash to the URL. The fix was to remove the branch filter for PR triggers or set it to asterisk, to allow all branches. Alternatively, use the GitHub Pull Request Builder plugin for dedicated PR handling. Always test both push and PR events separately to ensure they trigger builds. Branch filters apply to both push and PR triggers. If you set a branch filter like main, PRs from feature branches won't trigger builds. Use asterisk to allow all branches for PR triggers. A missing trailing slash in the webhook URL causes GitHub to send requests to a URL that Jenkins doesn't listen on. Jenkins may return a 200 OK from a default handler, but the webhook is never processed. Always ensure the URL ends with a slash. Even if the webhook reaches Jenkins, if the job doesn't have GitHub hook trigger enabled under build triggers, Jenkins will ignore the event. Always check that the trigger is enabled for the job. The article mentions the classic GitHub plugin is deprecated but still works. As of Jenkins 2.44+, the classic plugin may have compatibility issues with newer GitHub API changes. It is strongly recommended to use the GitHub integration plugin exclusively, as the classic plugin is no longer actively maintained and may break with future Jenkins updates. To simulate a GitHub webhook locally for debugging, use curl with a sample payload and the HMAC secret. This helps verify that Jenkins correctly processes the webhook and triggers the pipeline without relying on GitHub's delivery. GitHub webhook payloads can be up to 25 MB, but Jenkins may have default request size limits, e.g., in Jetty or reverse proxy. Large payloads, e.g., from force pushes with many commits, can be truncated or rejected. Configure proxy request buffering off in Nginx and increase max boast size in Jenkins arguments to handle larger payloads. To diagnose webhook issues, start by checking GitHub's recent deliveries for the HTTP response. Then tail Jenkins logs filtering for GitHub webhook. Use curl to manually send a test post to the webhook endpoint. For detailed logging, add a log recorder for the plugin at fine level. Let's run through some common interview questions. How does Jenkins verify webhook authenticity? HMAC SHA-256 signature comparison. What is the correct webhook URL format? http://Jenkins URL/GitHub webhook/ with trailing slash. How to troubleshoot a 200 OK but no build. Check job trigger, branch filter, and Jenkins logs. And a few frequently asked questions. Why is my webhook not triggering builds? Missing trailing slash or job trigger not enabled. How to generate HMAC secret? Use OpenSol rand hex 32. Can one webhook trigger multiple jobs? Yes, if jobs have matching repository URL and triggers. To recap, always ensure the webhook URL ends with a trailing slash. Enable HMAC secret verification to prevent forged webhooks. Use the GitHub integration plugin for modern pipeline support. Test both push and PR events separately. Implement monitoring and alerting to catch silent failures early. Ready to go deeper? Up next, trigger Jenkins pipeline with GitHub webhook, then Jenkins Maven build, then Jenkins artifact management. Find them all at TheCodeForge.io. Thanks for watching. The full article and code examples are covered in detail at TheCodeForge.io.